Friday is when the CDC vaccine advisors plan to get together again to discuss the J&J vaccine and its potential link to rare but concerning blood clots. The White House says science and safety are driving its cautious approach here. The timing, though, is tough. Accelerating the pace of vaccinations is a big piece of trying to fight what right now is a stubborn and steady pace of new COVID infections. Let's take a look at the numbers. This is the U.S. case timeline. You see 74,289 new COVID infections reported just yesterday, and you see the average. 70,000 plus, the 7-day moving average. This is a stubborn line right across here. That's too high of a number. Officials want to push it down. And so where is it rising the fastest? These are the 5 states which have the fastest rising case count over the past 2 weeks. Oregon, Nevada, Louisiana, North Carolina, and Maine, all blue states on the map here, rising most trouble over the past 2 weeks in those states. Where are cases falling more quickly? These are the top 5 states, if you want to call it that, in terms of cases going down over the last 2 weeks: Vermont, New York, New Jersey, Nebraska, and Hawaii. All this playing out, of course, as part of the vaccination rollout and the vaccination race. 78.5 million Americans are fully vaccinated. That's just shy of 24% of the population fully vaccinated. Partially vaccinated, just shy of 126 million. You see the numbers there going up every day. That's just shy of 38%. 38% of the American population is at least partially vaccinated. Again, you look at it state by state. Which states are doing the best, the highest percentage of their population vaccinated? That's Alaska, New Mexico, Maine, Rhode Island, and Connecticut are the top 5 in terms of getting everybody fully vaccinated. Those numbers moving up. So who's at the bottom of that list? Well, these 5 states, mostly here in the South: Tennessee, Arkansas, Alabama, Georgia, and Utah, all states with Republican governors. That's where the hesitancy is a lot in Republican communities and in rural communities with the lowest vaccination rates as we go through. Let's take a look at the world. From a global perspective, the United States is doing quite well, at the head of the pack, or at least ahead of the pack among larger countries. Again, 23.5% fully vaccinated. Look to the north in Canada, just 2.3%. Mexico, just 2.3%. The UK is at 12.5%. Germany, 6.4%. South Africa, fewer than 1% of the population in South Africa has been fully vaccinated. You have heard calls from around the world that the United States should do more to help this global effort. The head of the CDC says it will in time.
I think we have a responsibility to vaccinate the rest of the world, both from a humanitarian standpoint as well as from a global health security standpoint, to ensure that we don't have further variants that threaten both the rest of the world as well as the United States. And I look forward to having CDC, where we have partnerships across the globe, to having a key role in providing technical assistance and support to make that happen.
Let's get some expertise and insights from Dr. Kevin Ault. He's a member of that CDC Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, also a professor and division director at the University of Kansas Medical Center. Doctor, it's great to see you again. Let me start with the point Dr. Walensky was just making. There have been calls from around the world, please help. The United States of America, please help. And one of the lines essentially has been yes, once we get completely vaccinated here in the United States. Where are we? When will there be enough supply, not only to deal with what you need here in America, but to share more?
Well, I certainly agree with what she said, the CDC director said. You know, we are churning out vaccine more and more every week in the United States, and so we should be able to share with the rest of the world. But as she said, it's in our self-interest to do this, because the more the virus replicates, the more problems we're going to have with these variants. And the only way to keep it from replicating, or one of the ways to keep it from replicating, is vaccination, social distancing, and mask. And so, yes, we have a global responsibility, and we're a global leader in public health.
And one of the ways to help is to get more vaccines in the pipeline, which would be act as quickly as possible, resolve as quickly as possible the question that you are dealing with right now, which is Johnson & Johnson, the vaccine. The next meeting is next Friday. Why do you need a week, and what are you looking for before you would raise your hand and say, maybe we need an advisory, or maybe we need to tell young women maybe shouldn't do this, but get the rest of these vaccines into the system ASAP?
Well, when we met on Wednesday, we were looking over the data very carefully. There were 6 cases in about 7 million vaccinations. And so, as you mentioned, it did skew towards women, and it did skew towards younger people. We need to know, what the size of the problem is if there are more than 6 cases. So we're going to shake the trees in the databases that the CDC has. And we also need to know what the denominator is. Is it just young women, or is it the whole population that's been vaccinated? And that's the only way really to make a risk-benefit analysis and a recommendation about this. And so there are still a fair number of people in the United States, 2 or 3 million, if I remember correctly, who've been vaccinated in the last 2 weeks. And we've seen these reactions within 2 weeks. And so it doesn't sound like a very long time, but we'll have a fair amount of data in just those 9 or 10 days.
All right, we'll watch that meeting play out. Another big challenge, Dr. Alt, as you well know, is when are children vaccinated? Pfizer is waiting for emergency youth authorization for the teenage group, and there's some studies underway. I believe we can show them now. Phase 1 trials beginning even in young children. At Stanford Medicine, 144 participants across the United States, ages 2 to 5. At Cincinnati Children's Hospital, 340 kids participating. Walk us through and separate the two groups, if you will. It's a big question as we finish this school year, get close to finishing this school year, and then think about what's it going to look like come August and September. Where are we when it comes to these two groups of children, teenagers and then the lower school children?
Well, with teenagers, their body mass and physiology is more similar to adults maybe than 2-year-olds. And so you can do some bridging studies as far as immunogenicity, safety, and efficacy. And so we have a local children's hospital, Children's Mercy in Kansas City, Missouri, and they filled up very quickly in those trials. And so we have plenty of volunteers, I think, for that older group of children. It gets a little tougher when you have to decrease the dose and look at side effects in those youngest infants. But some of those states that you mentioned where they're having increased rates, some of that might be driven by school-based transmission. So we certainly want to get on top of at least the older children over the summer, the adolescents, then work our way down to the younger children.
This one's a little bit more technical, but I want you to listen to Andy Slavitt. He's one of the White House COVID coordinators. They're taking about $1.7 billion, and they're trying to ramp up the genome tracking, fix my language if I get it wrong, of these variants, to try to better understand these variants and why they're why they tend to be more infectious, more nasty is the lay term I use. Listen to Andy Slavitt earlier today.
This funding will enable CDC and states to do more genomic sequencing as we activate the nation's great research capabilities to detect variants earlier and increase our visibility into emerging threats. This investment will give public health officials the chance to react more quickly to prevent and stop the spread.
Help the non-medical person out there listening understand why this is so important and exactly what it is.
Well, I think that's great news for a couple of different reasons. Reason number one is, how are we going to find out if these variants cause problems when people have already been vaccinated? And really the only way to do that is to find people who get COVID after they've been vaccinated and then sequence, as you just mentioned, that genome and see if it's a variant or somebody that got infected with a different type of COVID. So we need to do that. We also need to know the sequences if we ever talk about a next generation or next steps as far as vaccine development, as far as what's circulating. And so that makes perfect sense, and that's a logical thing to do from a public health perspective. And it's expensive, it involves sending specimens around, sequencing, and so that's the reason that dollar figure is so large.
Dr. Alt, grateful for your time and insights. Advance warning, we'll be checking in with you next Friday for sure to see how the conversations go about the J&J vaccine. Appreciate your time, sir.